Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl Podcast, which is all about motivating and inspiring you. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. The Tough Girl Podcast is sponsorship and ad-free thanks to the monthly financial support of patrons. To find out more about supporting your favourite podcast, then please do go and check out Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. There's currently over 220 patrons who are supporting the mission to help me increase the amount of female role models in the media. Take action now and become one of them. I'd love to reach 250 patrons supporting the Tough Girl Podcast would be truly epic. All patrons will get their name on a dedicated patrons page on the Tough Girl website. Today, I'm absolutely delighted that we're speaking to Liz Thomas, who is one of the most experienced hikers in the US and is known for backpacking light, fast, and solo. In 2011, she broke the women's unsupported speed record on the Appalachian Trail, beating the previous record by almost a week. She's completed the Triple Crown of hiking, the Appalachian Trail, the 2,650-mile Pacific Crest Trail, and the 3,100-mile Continental Divide Trail. She's also backpacked over 20,000 miles across the United States on 20 long-distance hikes.
I would definitely describe myself as a long-distance hiker, and I have hiked over 20 wilderness long-distance trails, but also something that I'm really passionate about that I do is urban hiking, this idea of inspiring people to go out and hike and walk and explore right where they are. So I've gone on and hiked in 10 different cities, routes that are 100 to 250 miles long, all within a city's limits. And I also really am passionate about getting other people outdoors, whether that's long distance hiking, taking their dream to a reality, or learning how to hike in the very beginning, or learning how to get out and be active just at home where they maybe don't want to go out in nature, but want to explore their city. So those are the things that I'm passionate about.
Love it. Well, tell us a little bit more about growing up for you. Do you have siblings? Do you come from like an outdoor hikey camping family?
Yeah, so I have one younger sister, and I would definitely not describe my family as a hiking, camping family. I had a first grade teacher who was very interested in getting little kids out to hike and spend time in nature, and I absolutely adored it. And even though neither of my families had really hiked or camped before, they could tell that this teacher really impacted my life. And I would beg them on weekends to hey, can we go to this little nature trail? And the part of Northern California I grew up in was pretty suburban. It didn't have a lot of open space or green space, but there was this little park. It had a couple miles of trails, and I wanted to go there every weekend. And I wasn't a super fit kid at all, but being in nature was something I loved. So when I went off to college, I took that memory of being in nature and started doing more and more ambitious things. And that's how I am here today.
Oh, I love it. So let's talk about some of these ambitious things that you've done. And, you've said that you did 20 wilderness long trails. What was sort of the first, was there a major big trail that you did sort of either after you graduated or, how did you evolve into doing the long distance hiking trails?
Yeah. So I think when I went off to college, I guess you call it university, I had a hard time really finding a lot of friends. I was pretty far from home. And what I found myself doing is remembering that love of being a kid and being in nature. And there's mountains. There's actually mountains in Southern California where I went to school. And I started thinking hey, wouldn't it be cool to go up there? And so I went up there. I started hiking more. I actually started hiking with some of my professors. And the next thing I knew, I was starting to do bigger and bigger day hikes to the point where I thought, maybe it would be cool to get into even longer things. So that's how I kind of started transitioning over to through hiking and long distance backpacking.
What was your first trail that you did completely, the first through hike?
That's funny because in the long distance hiking community, we definitely are how long does something have to be a through hike? So my first long distance trail that most people recognize as a long distance trail is the Tahoe Rim Trail, which goes around Lake Tahoe in California and Nevada. It's 175 miles long or so. It's a loop hike. And it was kind of my warm up because I knew if I could hike that, I could go on to do something a little bit longer and a little bit harder, like the John Muir Trail. And then my dream was to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. So I kind of wanted to test it on something shorter to be okay, do I really like this? And I not only really liked it, but I was obsessed with it and thought about it all the time and couldn't wait to get out on another long distance hike.
What was it that made you so obsessed with it?
I think part of it was in retrospect, it's kind of crazy, but I did that hike solo. It was more or less my first backpacking trip of that length. And I really loved the independence. I loved being out there, having time to think without distractions. I loved meeting people along the way. And I loved knowing that everything that I was doing was possible because of how I was treating my body and what my body was capable of and what my mind was capable of.
Yeah, I love it. So you completed the Tahoe Rim Trail, 175 miles. It was like your loop hike, the warm up. You became absolutely obsessed. Did you then go on to do the John Muir Trail and then do the Pacific Crest Trail?
I actually ended up doing them in a very different order. It's kind of funny how life tosses things at you. So I ended up hiking the Appalachian Trail next.
Woo! Sorry.
Have you hiked the Appalachian Trail?
I have, yeah. I did it in 2017, so it's absolutely amazing. But anyway, you carry on. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, you probably had a similar experience where I had never spent time in that part of the country and that sort of climate at all. I don't think I'd ever backpacked in the rain before hiking that trail. So it was a big change, but I loved watching spring unfurl before me, going from these trees with no leaves on them to flowers and green all around. And when I finished, I knew that I was a very different person than how I started. Which would you say that's how your experience on the AT was as well?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I was just going to ask you, like, why you? I don't know. Oh, I don't know if I was a very different person when I finished. I don't. Oh, I don't know. That's a really difficult question, but it's the one question I want to throw back to you and be like, what do you think changed about you?
I think part of it was. I learned to quiet my mind a little bit. A lot of the things that I was trying to work out, I was fairly young when I hiked the Appalachian Trail. And so having that time and that space to kind of figure out what I wanted to do next in life was really valuable to me. But also being out there that long and having to figure stuff out for that long. Like, how am I going to get food, or how am I going to get to this town because my gear has fallen apart? All of these things were, like I didn't have a plan B. Like I had to figure it out myself.
How old were you when you did the Appalachian Trail?
I was 22.
22. Yeah, I think that's probably maybe where the differences are for me and you. Because I did the trail when I was 35, or was I 36? I can't remember. And I think I'd already gone through, before I did the Appalachian Trail, I did a big race called the Marathon des Sables. So I think I'd already gone through a lot of that. I don't want to use the word like personal development, but having that thinking time, that quiet time, doing a big challenge. So I don't necessarily think like the Appalachian Trail changed me in that way, but I think if you do something like that when you are much younger, I think it can have a big impact on your life. So if you remember, when I was like 18, I sort of traveled around the world backpacking and did a lot of that sort of solo, and that hugely impacted me in terms of my self-confidence and self-belief in what I could do and what I could achieve. What happened after you finished the trail? I mean, was that a bit of a shock to the system? You spent so many months out living this incredibly simple life and learning how to quieten your mind and have this powerful time for thought and reflection. What happens once you reach Katahdin?
So I was very tired. I actually was talking to a journalist today about that experience of finishing. I was very tired, my joints hurt, my neck hurt, and I couldn't figure out why. I figured those were all just symptoms of hiking a long distance trail. And about a month later, I was in graduate school and I found myself going up the stairs to my apartment and noticed that I still was having trouble going upstairs and it still hurt and I was still tired all the time. So I got tested. I had Lyme disease, a little gift from the Appalachian Trail. Luckily, I was able to get that fixed through a round of antibiotics. But I think between the Lyme disease and the big transition, I think like a lot of long distance hikers, I was going through kind of like a post-hike blues period. Did you experience that as well?
Well, it's interesting that it's interesting you talk about the tiredness and stuff, because after I finished the Appalachian Trail, I actually also headed back to university to do my masters, and I was in quite bad shape really. I'd done it in 100 days, and I'd lost about like 2 stone in weight, and I was having real problems like sort of walking, and my knee even now, like my left knee. I'm sure everybody who listens to the podcast is like, we're sick of hearing about Sarah's left knee and her lazy glutes and everything else, but there was definitely a period of adventure blues, but I think doing the masters sort of kept my brain engaged as much as it could be. So I had that to fill it with. But I think if I was coming back to not having like a structure, then I think that would have been really challenging. How did you cope with your adventure blues?
So I was out also working on my master's at the time, and I had intended, when I started the program, I had intended to focus. I was going to school for environmental science, and I intended to focus more on wildlife, and ended up finding myself really interested in land management, specifically having to do with these large protected areas like the Appalachian Trail. So I found that my educational and academic focus, what I really cared about, switched because of the Appalachian Trail.
So did you change your masters, or did you just sort of change like your dissertation?
I changed the content of my dissertation. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. So you graduated with your masters. What happened afterwards? Was there a yearning to go and do like another thru-Hike?
Yes, definitely. I kind of had this belief that, okay, as soon as I finish my master's, this is going to be the last hurrah. And
you can't say that. You're probably only 24. That can't be your last hurrah.
Exactly. But I think when it comes to long distance hiking, there's definitely a feeling that, it's for young people or it's for retired people. And I'm at the point in my life now where I'm in my 30s, and I am fortunate enough to be in a community of people who structure their entire professional lives around being able to grasp situations where they're able to go out and long distance hike and make it really a priority. But yeah, after I finished graduate school, I hiked the Continental Divide Trail, which was huge, and it was very difficult, but I was really glad I did it.
It's interesting you picked like the CDT, so 3,100 miles. It runs right sort of down the center of the states instead of the PCT. Why did you pick the Continental Divide Trail instead of the Pacific Crest Trail? Because I know there isn't like a normal order, but I almost feel as though most people do the Appalachian Trail because it's sort of, and they are all hard obviously, but it's sort of the slightly less challenging one, and then the PCT is like takes it up a level, but then the CDT is probably even harder just because it's so much more remote.
Right. So I actually was able to hike it in the normal order. I hiked the PCT between my years in graduate school, and actually focused a lot of my graduate research on the PCT and land management along the PCT.
Got you. Okay, that makes sense. So tell us about the Continental Divide Trail then. How did you find that?
When I hiked it almost 10 years ago, there wasn't nearly as much information out there. And because of the schedule that I had school and then I had a little bit of work, I ended up starting much later than when most people hike southbound on that trail. And as a result, I think for most people who are hiking southbound, there's always this like, I have to get through southern Colorado before the big storms come in October. I've got to get through southern Colorado. And there was always this pressure of the weather and the grizzlies and the bugs and the navigation and the heat and the cold. That's like on the Continental Divide Trail. There's always something that things are always changing and you always have to keep on top of. You're juggling balls. And I think, that was such a huge learning experience because especially after hiking the AT and PCT, it's pretty easy for people to be like, oh, I have 4,000 miles of hiking. I've got this. And the CDT is like, nope. Still, there's always more to learn.
What was the biggest challenge on that trail? Or what was the biggest learning from that?
I think the weather ended up being lightning storms, snowstorms, navigation. Actually, when I hiked it, the CDTC, the trail organization, wasn't around, and they weren't building trail. They weren't marking trail. The map set was not super reliable. So it required I think the transition from a PCT or AT style trail to the CDT was really difficult for me. And I think it wasn't so much necessarily maybe the skills as this mindset of like, hey, there's not just one trail. You have to make these decisions all the time. So that was something that I learned quite a bit about on the CDT. But I recognize that with a lot of long distance hikers, that's a big jump mentally.
Yeah. What advice would you have for other women who want to get out there and get hiking? Because I know that's one of your passions, is to encourage, other people to go and hike and to get outdoors.
Yeah, I would say definitely go out there and do it. Don't wait for the boyfriend or the husband. I think that there's a lot of talk about like, oh, women shouldn't go out there solo, and I totally don't think that's true at all, especially for a popular trail like the AT or the PCT or even the CDT. On these long distance trails, you meet people along the way. Some of them end up being your lifetime friends. Don't just decide to commit to hike a trail with a random person on the internet. Like, go out there solo. You'll meet friends, and if you don't like them, you didn't commit to hike with them. So you've got your trail family, your tramily, that you didn't even know that you have. So yeah, I would definitely say go out there and do it, and do your research beforehand.
Absolutely. So with like sort of trail families, most people have like trail names. Do you just want to share your trail name and how you got it?
Yeah. So my trail name is Snorkle. I got that on my first hike of the Appalachian Trail. I got a brand new down sleeping bag, and 500 miles in, I saw the same bag for sale, and I said, hey, what gives? This bag was really expensive. They told me it would last 10 years, and mine looks all deflated, and the same model is hanging in the store, and it looks super poofy and warm. And so the person at the gear store said, did you get it wet? No. You sticking your head to your sleeping bag? And I was like, yeah, I got to keep my face warm. And he was like, well, your breath is condensing the down. You need to stick a snorkel up the top. So I had never really thought about the impact that moisture in the breath could have on impacting down over time, especially without drying out the bag. So that's something that I always teach people in my classes is like, hey, there's a little bit of a lesson in my funny trail name. I never actually did carry a snorkel, by the way. This idea of making sure you keep your bag dry from even moisture in the air or your breath.
Oh my God, that's absolutely fascinating. Actually, that would have annoyed me so much, like looking in the shop window and seeing like this beautiful, puffy, warm, amazing sleeping bag, and then being like, oh no, my breath has ruined my sleeping bag.
Luckily, I mean, it was just a matter of I needed to dry it out really well. But, especially starting off learning, there's all these little tiny tricks with gear, and it can be kind of intimidating to learn a little bit along the way.
I think gear is one of these things which it's almost like a topic that I'm reluctant to go down. Not for anything reason. It's just this is like multiple hours of conversation, and just there's my opinion would be I was going to say there's no right or wrong gear, but there is. But it's all about finding out what's the right gear for you. And anyway, this could get very, very complicated. But I was going to say, I mean, let's just talk briefly about gear. Like, do you have any, like, how do you decide what gear it is that you're going to use? And do you read reviews of other people? Is it just through your experience? Is it trial and error?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm at the point where my gear kit is pretty well set. I have a whole system that's worked really well for me for, at least 10 through hikes. And it's something that I've kind of whittled away with over the years. So certainly my first gear set, the skills that came with it, I ended up swapping out quite a few things along the way. And, swapping out gear, finding out the hard way that something's not going to work out for me is expensive. And it's annoying, and it can result in pain and a lot of lost time. So I think one of the things that I really want to encourage people to do is do their research. Don't just look at advertisements or marketing, and really find something that works for you beforehand, because it gets expensive and painful if you're on a long trail, and learn switching things out.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I suppose talking about this, do you want to just share more about tree line review and how that works and what your involvement is with that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I noticed is that a lot of gear review sites, not only are they mostly written by men for men, but one of the things I really wanted to do is take a long-term approach to looking at gear. I wanted to give people the sort of advice I would give a friend if they're like, hey, what should I get? So it's not sort of a lot of, at least outdoor media here in the US is very focused on is very focused on this idea that that like the newest thing, the newest technology is the best. And yet there's a lot of gear that's been solid for 10 years that thru-hikers have been using for 5 years that if you talk around in the hiking community, everyone will be like, oh yeah, that's a really, really good pick. You can't go wrong with that one. And those were the things that I wasn't seeing a lot of outdoor press about other than when it first was released. So I wanted to create a website that really gave the sort of information that's like, okay, this is what everyone considers the gold standard. Sure, there might be a few that are way more expensive that are better, but no one will bat an eye if they see you with that. In fact, they're going to be like, ah, good choice. And then the other thing too with gear reviews is I spend so much time personally reading every gear review that's out there, making a spreadsheet, seeing who likes this, why do they like it, where's their overlap, what are the customer reviews, and do the customer reviews match what the professional outdoor media is saying? And that process takes time. So I wanted to create a system with Treeline Review that would streamline that process, be really transparent about those spreadsheets that I make when I'm going through gear review process, and that also other experienced long-distance hikers, experienced outdoor athletes on who are writers for us, how they go about personally choosing gear. So we use a meta review process at Treeline Review. So it really takes in all of this data and kind of like presents it like, here's what we found. Here's what 95% of outdoor media says is the best one. And then lets people kind of decide from that angle. So they don't have to spend the 12 hours putting together a spreadsheet like we did.
Yeah. I mean, you're a columnist at the moment, which is titled Ask a Thru-Hiker, which is obviously awesome. What would you say is the biggest question that you get asked through that format?
Oh yeah, definitely. I would say most people really want to know how to take the time to go on a long distance hike and how to find the money to go on a long distance hike.
Yeah, do you know, it's so funny that you say that, because that's actually like the two things that I've been trying really hard to ask my guests this year is how do you have the time to do this, and where do you get the money from? So maybe can we just talk maybe a little bit more about the money and the budgeting, and you know, how do you afford to thru-hike? Like, how have you managed to make that work for you?
Yeah, you know, because I've been doing this for more than a decade, like every summer, every time I look at a hike, I've kind of funded it in a different way. And it certainly started to become a little more normalized the further out I've been doing. But one of the things that I think is important is committing to the idea that you want to hike and really spending, setting aside the money for it, like committing to it as a goal. Because I think once you commit to it, it becomes more than a, hey, I want to do this one day, but like you're actually doing things throughout your life to reorganize your life in order to be able to long distance hike, to make it a priority. So, I know people who have worked as baristas who have said, okay, I don't make a ton of money, but thru-hiking is really, really important to me. And so I'm making it a priority. I'm not going to go out with my friends. I'm going to have some really tough conversations with people about, hey, I need to save money because it's something they love so much. So I would say, committing and making that plan based on your commitment is something, the first step that's really important.
What's it like for you when you're actually out on the trail? Are you very conscientious of your budget or how you spend your money, or what are your money saving trips on trail life? Do you hang out in like the towns, or do you try and avoid like the vortex of town life?
Yeah, I mean, town definitely. I'm sure it's so noticeable in the AT. Is definitely a way to spend a lot of money that I don't necessarily always have. So trying to reduce my time in town, be really smart about what time of day I get into town, really can impact how much money I save and spend or save. And I usually hit town and I'm really hungry, so I'll try to go to a grocery store before I go to a restaurant and order like 2 entrees, which I've done before, and I've learned the hard way, is really, really expensive. Being able to tell the difference between hunger and dehydration, or at least know to what extent maybe I'm hitting town dehydrated instead of just hungry. Those tricks are pretty small, but they've saved me a lot of money.
I was going to say, like, I totally agree. Especially is when you walk into like a supermarket or a store, and it's like the smell of food. And if you're dealing with like hiker hunger, you see everything, and you're just like, oh, I want it all. And I'll just like go and buy like 5 Snicker ice cream bars and just like slam them down. It's just like, which is pretty disgusting. So we talked about the money and committing to the hike. We've talked about the gear. I'd just be interested to know, physically for you, do you do much training before you go on a hike, or so are you like at the gym? Like, what am I trying to ask? Yeah, do you do much for like physical training before you go on a hike, or is it something that you just build up over time?
Yeah, I would say, and you could probably attest to this as well, with long distance hiking, part of it's muscle memory. So the first time I went on a hike, on a long hike, the Appalachian Trail, I spent a lot of time training. And I certainly did train as well on the other hikes, but I think to some extent, once the body has done bigger miles and has done the backpacking thing, it's kind of like riding a bike a little bit. And I've seen certainly like friends who are in their 50s who maybe hiked a long trail a few years ago, but are, like more or less couch ridden, like get up off the couch and be able to do a 20-mile day. And you're like, how did you do that? And, it hurts the next day, but there's something about that, like, hey, I've done this before. This is what I do, that like somehow the body and the mind speak and they're able to do it.
Yeah. I think there is almost that the beginning, though for me, I don't know, it's just like psychological. It's just like the first 2 weeks. That's all you've got to focus on, is just get through the first 2 weeks. And then you do get your trail legs, where you become more accustomed to life when you're out there. Mentally, like, what's going on mentally for you when you're hiking? Do you get like low points on hikes, or not that necessarily want to quit, but just when do you struggle on long distance hikes, or not really?
I would say I have when I first started getting into it, and now the highs and the lows, and the quick rebound from the lows to incredible highs is one of the things that I really, really love about thru hiking. I love being totally freezing on a pass, wondering how am I going to make it to town in order to eat, and then a few hours later being someplace warm, eating a meal, being like, how did we get this? This is magic. I think that's one of the most fun things about a thru hike.
It's sometimes interesting because I do feel as though many people only share like the highs, like the beautiful views and the stunning sunsets and the campfire and the amazing people and the trail angels. And they sort of slip their mind about when it's cold and it's wet and it's rainy, you've got blisters, or you've fallen over into the mud, or you've broken your pole, or your shoelace is snapped, and you're just like, so it is interesting trying to get that balance. I mean, how do you share a lot on social media?
Yeah, when I first started long distance hiking, like Instagram didn't exist, and smartphones didn't exist. But I do like to share on social media now about those highs and lows, because I think it's really easy, especially on Instagram. People will only have these beautiful photos of these amazing passes. And the lows are part of the learning experience and part of what makes the thru hike magical, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And sometimes you actually got to have the lows to be able to appreciate the highs, really, the goodness and everything else.
Exactly.
You have actually written a book about thru hiking. Do you just want to share more about the title of your book and what it's about and what sort of things that you cover off in it? Because I think it'll be super useful for everyone listening.
Yeah, so it's called Long Trails: Mastering the Art of the thru-Hike, and it actually won the National Outdoor Book Award for Best Instructional Book. And it's one of the first books that deals with this idea of how do I take my dream of going on a long distance hike and actually turn it into something that I'm doing right now. And one of the things that was really important to me is the books that did exist out there on long distance hiking were written by men, and they were very much this sort of like expert top-down way of thinking about long-distance hiking. And what I really wanted to do was create this more kind of community-based crowdsourcing. So I have all sorts of different people profiled. So we talk about, like, I'll talk about my way of doing something and someone else will talk about their way of doing something. So people really have kind of this like toolkit where they can be like, oh, you know what? Liz sounds way too hardcore, but this guy Pi likes to hang out in town. I'm totally going to follow more of his advice. So it's kind of a little bit like a choose your own adventure. And then the other thing too is that a lot of the, not that there were like two others, but the other books, talked about like very practical things like gear, which I talk about, and bears and snakes. But they weren't talking about the things that I thought really impacted people's long distance hikes, like how do I save up for it? And how do I have time to go on a long distance hike, which we just talked about earlier. And also there weren't a lot of conversations happening like, how do I tell my family? How do I tell my spouse? How do I leave my kids behind to go on these adventures? And so I was able to find people who had been in all of these situations to talk about what they'd done in order to make it happen.
Oh, fantastic. And actually, I think some of the, I don't want to say like more of like the soft stuff, but it is actually, it's so equally as important actually having those conversations with your loved ones and dealing with their fears as well as, trying to deal with your own fears, because actually sometimes you need a little help. Like, how do I navigate this? Hi mum, hi dad. Yeah, I'm off to walk in the woods for 6 months and and then everyone else like, you crazy? What about the bears and your single female solo hike? Yada yada yada, and dealing with all of that. Thank you for sharing that. What I'll do is I'll make sure I put the links to your book in the show notes, so that people can go and purchase it, because it sounds absolutely awesome. Now, one of the other things I want to talk about was like the urban hiking. So I don't know where this idea came from, but I'd love for you to share more about that.
Yeah, definitely. So the idea for urban hiking came to me because a random person messaged me on my blog and said, hey, you have this speed record on the Appalachian Trail. You've done all of these long distance hikes. Have you ever thought about doing a 250-mile hike all within the confines of a city? And I was like, no, why would someone do that?
That would be awful. It's not going back to nature.
It defeats the purpose of hiking. But this person said, hey, I put together this route, kind of shared the ideas with me. And I said, okay, the city was actually LA. I was living in Denver at the time, in Colorado. But I said, okay, you know what? I'll go out during the winter because it's too cold in Colorado to go hiking. There's too much snow in the high country. So I'll go do it more or less, early spring, and it'll be warm there. And at least I can get in 250 miles of training miles, is the way that I saw it. And I ended up actually really, really loving it in a way that I didn't expect at all. So I went from hiking LA to hiking San Francisco to hiking Seattle to Portland. I did 3 in Denver. And now people ask me to go to cities. Tourism offices will contact me, like in Tucson, and say, hey, we'd really like you to come explain by foot what makes our city so awesome to visit. So it's been really, really fun way to get to see the world.
What are the different challenges of urban hiking to nature hiking?
So I think, like most long distance hikers, my first urban hike was the most difficult urban hike, steep learning curve. So I would say the number one is pounding on pavement. The asphalt is so hard on hikers' feet, especially with that amount of miles and any sort of weight in a backpack.
To be fair, I'm just thinking of your feet. I'm like, how are your feet? Do you get blisters? Have you got all your toenails?
My feet are in pretty good condition. I would say on an urban hike, like plantar fasciitis is something that can be a little more common. Achilles tendonitis, both common among long distance wilderness hikers. But something about that pavement can make it a little more pronounced.
So how does the urban hiking work then? Do you sort of like plan, are you planning a route as in via stops that you want to go to? Is it other people saying, right, this is the route? Are you going back and forth? Yeah, like how does it sort of come together?
So, LA was the only city where a group had come up to me, said, hey, we put together this route. And urban hiking in LA actually has a really big culture, as in New York City as well. Of people who maybe haven't don't want to go out into the mountains realize that their own urban jungles is a great training ground and much easier commute than going out into a wilderness area. So in some areas, these local urban hiking groups will reach out to me and tell me like, hey, these are some cool features. And other times I've crowdsourced it, try to come up with a theme that really speaks to what makes that particular city really cool.
And are you camping out there, or are you like finding hostels or hotels or Airbnb or couch surfing? How does like the accommodation work?
I've done a little bit of all of that. I prefer to not camp if possible, although I have done it on certain routes where I feel comfortable doing that, and where it's legal. But one of the things that also makes this urban hiking really cool is being able to stay with people along the way. Some of them who are involved in the urban hiking community, some that I meet through Airbnbs. I'll also hook it up with hostels. And sometimes it's people that I've known from like my past lives. So people I went to, when I hiked San Francisco, I stayed with people who I knew from graduate school, from college, from high school, from middle school, and from elementary school. Like people I hadn't seen since elementary school that we stayed in touch via social media, and I stayed with them for a night. So that was kind of cool social aspect of that trail as well.
How do you control the budget? Because I think I'd just be like, ooh, food place, ooh, let's stop there, ooh, that looks fun, let's go and have some, I don't know, like I think I'd be, but it is, what's it like? I know that sounds really weird, but just like,
yeah, I mean, urban hiking, it's kind of like walking through, like among through hikers when we're in town, we, as you know, we call going into town being a vortex, the town vortex. And so with urban hiking, you're literally walking through that vortex and having to make progress both miles wise and not spending money wise. So there's all these pressures to get distracted, to get off course, to just give up at the end of the day and take a bus or take a lift home. And I think that's part of the challenge, to stay so focused on your mission that you can be bombarded by all of these distractions and keep moving forward.
I think mentally as well. I mean, I know. I'm trying really, really hard here not to judge urban hiking, and because obviously, I haven't done it. But I'm thinking, one of the reasons of going back to nature is to almost get that peace and quiet, and to like mentally be able to switch off and relax and not to have any distractions. But I can imagine, walking through New York with the traffic and the noise, or like LA, or and the smells and the people and traffic lights and everything. Mentally, how is that different? I mean, how do you manage that mentally?
Well, I think, like thru hikers often talk about being on a long distance hike as being a walking meditation. And in some ways, like, there are distractions in the sense that the weather's changing. I'm hungry. I've got a blister. I'm thirsty. My water is running out, like all of these things that are going on and setting alarms off in the brain. And part of making miles is being like, okay, I'm just going to be at peace with these and keep moving until like I really actually need to address them. And I think in that same way, urban hiking, although it takes some time and a skill, is that same sort of meditation. And the sort of goals that I set along the way to string together the route. So like the AT or the PCT or the CDT, like the goal is to stay on the crest of the mountains. Like in LA, my goal was to go to each of these public stairways, and, climbing them, each one I would do would feel like that feeling of satisfaction on the AT where you're like, oh, I just got to a new shelter. I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to keep going. But I've reached this checkpoint. And in the same way, like urban hiking has that same sort of reinforcement as well.
Yeah, absolutely. What's next for you? Have you got any more hikes coming up?
Yeah, I actually will be urban hiking New York City, which has kind of intimidated me for a while because there's just so much going on in New York City. And it took me a really long time to figure out a theme that I thought was really resonated with things that were important to me, which is getting people outdoors and getting people access to nature, even when they're in the city.
Do you know, it makes me laugh because I was just thinking when you said a theme, and my first thought was like food. I was thinking the theme is going to be food. We're going to walk around. We'll have like pizza and bagels and like donuts, and yeah, obviously that's not quite the theme that you were going for. Well,
I definitely will be eating a lot of delicious New York food. Do not worry.
When are you going to be doing that in New York?
I'm leaving for that. I'll be starting next Wednesday.
Oh my God, that's so exciting. So I'm going to do some quick fire questions with you. So they're more like quick questions from me, but your answers don't necessarily have to be super quick. What book are you currently reading at the moment?
I am currently reading the #1 Ladies Detective Agency.
Ooh, nice. What music or album are you listening to, or what's the song your favorite song?
So I went to a concert a few weeks ago, where Danny Elfman, the guy who did all the music for like Nightmare Before Christmas, he's writing classical pieces that aren't for movies now, and he had a piece 1111 that was amazing and just so cool to watch. And I've been listening to it quite a bit because I found it online because it was released like right after the concert.
Nice. Food, 2 questions. What's your favorite on-trail food and your favorite off-trail food?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm kind of obsessed with broccoli, so
that's not what I expected as an answer at all. Is that your on-trail food, broccoli, or the off-trail food?
If I can get it on trail, it's amazing. But it's definitely up there with my favorite off-trail foods. On-trail food, I really like having cheese on trail. Like I never get tired of cheese. The more I hike, the more tired of lots and lots of common foods I get. But cheese is still really solid.
I like that. Cheese. Good shout. This is going to be a really difficult one. Or maybe it's not. I don't know, actually. Do you have a favorite piece of gear?
Ooh, that is a hard one. I feel like being a thru-hiker and being someone who subscribed to the ultralight gear philosophy, like my kit is kind of narrowed down. It's kind of like I've Marie Kondo'd my backpacking life, and everything that's in my pack is something that sparks an incredible amount of joy. I love my sleeping quilt. I love all the clothing that I have. I love my shoes. That's really hard to say. I would say one thing that I do that is really different than most people is that I use a water system where I use a hydration bag, and then I cut the hose and put in my Sawyer filter. So it works as an inline filter where I suck the end of my hydration tube. There's dirty water in the bag, comes clean into my mouth via the tube or via the filter. So the filter in the tube. So I really like that system.
Nice. I love it. How do you relax?
Am I allowed to say hiking? Yoga, reading, taking hot baths with Epsom salt. Yeah.
Love it. Are you a morning person or a night owl?
I would say I'm probably more of a morning person, but I'm not bad at night. I would say I'm not much of an afternoon person.
Do you have afternoon naps?
I should. I really should.
Amazing. What time do you wake up in the morning?
6
a.m. Oh my goodness. Wow. Love it. Love it. Love it. Amazing. And Liz, do you have a mantra or do you have a quote that you live by?
I should, but I don't.
Got you. And then Liz, what are your final words of advice for other women who want to get out there, who want to get hiking, they want to spend more time outdoors?
Yeah. So I would say for people who currently don't spend a lot of time outdoors, one of the things to do is start small, start local, and not be intimidated by all the gear that's involved. A lot, especially day hikes, you can do with stuff you already have. And then for women who are already getting out there a lot and who want to get out there even more, I would say think about how you want to prioritize being outdoors in your life and see what you can readjust so that you can have more time and more money to do it.
Love it. And Liz, where's the best place for people to follow along with your adventures, buy your books, find out more about the gear that you review, etc.?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram and at Facebook at Liz Thomas Hiking. There's no spaces, it's all lowercase. And my website is www.eathomas.com. And then Also, if you want to learn more about gear, Treeline Review, treelinereview.com, no spaces, is the website where I, as well as many other experienced long-distance hikers and long-distance bikers and climbers, talk about gear and do meta reviews of gear.
Awesome. Liz, thank you so much for coming on the Tough Girl podcast to share more about your thru-hiking adventures and your urban hiking adventures and provide us with awesome knowledge and information. I really do appreciate you giving up your time.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. This was really fun.
Hey tribe, thank you so much for listening to that episode with Liz. What an absolute legend. Thru-hiking is phenomenal. It's something that I did in 2017. I thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail, absolutely loved it. I did it slightly differently. So most people thru-hike in about 5.5, 6 months. I did it in 100 days. I've shared more about that on the Tough Girl podcast, so you can listen to my episode about it, but you can also watch what it was like on a daily basis. So there's 100 vlogs on the Tough Girl Challenges YouTube channel where basically you can see what life was like every single day for the 100 days, apart from like day 98 where I lost the footage or something. There's also a very short film which I created for the Sheffield Women in Adventure Film Festival. That's about 6 minutes long. It's quite an emotional film. I seem to have selected all the clips where I'm crying, but it wasn't actually like that on the Appalachian Trail. But go and check it out, especially if you are interested in something like the Appalachian Trail. If you're interested in a couple of the other big thru hikes in America, we've talked about the Pacific Crest Trail. We've spoken with Alex Mason, who has hiked the Pacific Crest Trail from both north to south and south to north, so from Mexico to Canada, Canada to Mexico. And Alex has actually recently come back on the podcast to share more about her Appalachian Trail hike. So she did that hike last year, and that's on Tough Girl Extra. We've also spoken with Jessica Mills. So Jessica's known as Dixie. Her brand or company or webpage is known as Homemade Wanderlust, and she hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2015. And so she's been on the podcast to share more about her experience of that hike and how it changed her life. And most recently, at the beginning of this year, she came back on the Tough Girl podcast Extra to talk more about the Pacific Crest Trail. But there's also loads of other episodes about different treks and walks. So for example, you may enjoy Hannah Endelkamp. Hannah walked 1,000 miles around Wales with a donkey. There's also Tara Romes, who was the first woman to walk around Australia, which is just phenomenal. Janie McGill, she walked 630 miles. She did a 630-mile trek of the Southwest Coastal Path. So there's a huge amount of episodes on the Tough Girl podcast, as you're probably aware. We're over 209 episodes. If you go to toughgirlchallenges.com, you can find more information out about the women that I've interviewed. You can also find more information out about me, the books that I've written, the challenges that I've done from cycling Pacific Coast Highway to running the Marathon des Sables. So please do go check out toughgirlchallenges.com. If you want to find out more about what I get up to behind the scenes, then come and follow along on Instagram stories at Tough Girl Challenges. I always love to hear, what you're up to, and, send me a DM on Instagram stories. It's a great way to connect. So please do come along and follow. I'd love to know where you're listening to the Tough Girl podcast and which episodes you're listening to. The thing that I find really interesting about the Tough Girl podcast is that when I go and look at the stats, I can click on some days and I can see that there's been over like 190 episodes downloaded in one day. So every day we're getting about 500 downloads and we're coming up to 800,000 listens, which is incredible. The goal is obviously to reach 1 million. That would just be absolutely insane for this passion project that I started back in 2015 with 4 episodes. I wouldn't have actually been able to get this far without the help and the support of patrons. So I mentioned it at the start of the podcast, but patrons financially contribute every single month, whether that's $2 a month, $5 a month, $20 a month. If you want to get involved with the mission, if you want to pay it forward, then please do think about contributing. You can go to Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast to find out more about it. Think of it as buying me a coffee every single week. If you listen to the podcast and it's almost like an hour of content every single week. If you're listening to every episode, that's 4 hours a month. Sometimes when there's bonus episodes, it's more like 6 hours a month. That's a huge amount of content that you are getting for free, and it will continue to be free. But if you can support it anyway, it really does make a big difference. So thank you to everyone who is supporting. Thank you to all of my patrons around the world. I really do appreciate what you do. And thank you so much for choosing the Tough Girl podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for supporting. Thank you so much for writing reviews. It really does make such an incredible difference. And I'm super excited to be on this journey with you, and I can't wait until we do hit that big 1 million number. And everybody who's been behind me know it is because it's because you listen, it's because you support, it's because you tell your friends about it. Anyway, have an awesome day wherever you are, and I will speak to you soon. All right, take care, lots of love, bye.